Matayo Uiagalelei is a very large athlete, just like DJ was, coming out of St. John Bosco in Bellflower, California, currently listed at 6'5", 265. Now, he was one of those players currently listed as the number 6 edge recruit that I was talking about, how it's really funny watching them play tight end against these smaller kids. And it's just crazy to know that this guy is going to be playing somewhere with his hand in the dirt along a defensive line, but at the same time, he was out there catching touchdowns and he was out there making plays. The unique thing about Mateo that was really fun is that the original link I sent to you guys for highlights was mostly tight end plays. There were not a lot of defensive end plays. And as I started to do more and more digging, all I was really finding was mostly these tight end plays that he was lining up outside and getting these one-on-one reps. He's a really nice tight end prospect, but he's likely going to make his money playing on the defensive side of the ball. So, Matt, I want to go to you first. You actually have a really interesting perspective on him, on where you think he's going to end up, where he's going to be playing on defense.
Well, first of all, I thought that you were crazy and like totally messed up like the highlights and all that you sent me.
Same.
When I looked at it, I was just like, what are we, I thought we were talking about edge rushers here and he's showing me a tight end, so then, but as you do digging, you look into his huddle and all those other things that are out there, with his clips. Yeah, primarily all I see is reps at the tight end position. And I said to you guys too, that I didn't see a lot of, plays from that defensive end position where I see him in that role at the next level, because it's not like it's going to get easier, rushing, the passer or playing the run at the next level. It's going to get more difficult. So as I kind of watched him, in his body, his athleticism, clearly he can run, change direction, catches the ball extremely well, all that stuff at the tight end position. I do think that he could potentially play tight end at that next level, but he would be a different tight end than like a Travis Kelce and what we see in this modern era, right? He would be a little bit more of an old school guy, a little bit more physical, run blocker, all that kind of stuff, running over people, catching the ball in the flat, transitioning, that kind of a thing. If he stays on the defensive side of the football, I see him more as like a potential 3 technique. I really do, as an interior defensive lineman. Like you said, he's 6'5", 265 pounds. He's not going to get lighter. He's not going to get skinnier these next few years, of his development at that next level when he gets into that Power 5 program, weightlifting, and the food regimen that they have for those guys. So that's where, like, I see, like, add another 15 to 20 pounds to this kid as a young freshman or a sophomore going forward. And I feel like he's just going to get moved into the interior part of that defensive line, as a 3 technique or maybe even a nose guard, depending on his power and strength and all that kind of stuff going forward.
And Joe, I think that's the biggest selling point to him, in my opinion, too, Matt, which is a great note, right? It's like, if this kid catches on with a program that is a defensive system that works between 3 and 4 man fronts, I think that he would be a perfect fit. Because I can project him, working in some 5, some 4, 4-eye, 3 tech. Like, he can move all over the place a little bit. I think the main point, and the point that I 100% agree with you on, is that he's not a wide alignment rusher, right? Like, he's not a super twitchy, bendy guy. He's powerful though, and he's got a
he's not frame. Like line up in the 9 technique and just rush the passer on 3rd and long. I don't see that, like you said, at the twitchiness. And that's where, again, his versatility, like you said, is going to be big for him.
Yeah, and I think that with you get this kid up to 285, 290 when all is said and done, and he's 6'5" with the length that he has, he could be a weapon, kind of being moved up and down the line of scrimmage. But this isn't a great comparison when we're going from Keon Keeley to Matayo Uiagalelei. They're very different football players. They're going to win in very, very different ways. And it's a projection for Mateo right now because you haven't seen it a ton. But I think why people are so high on him and why people are excited about the progress he could make is that body type that we talked about, right? The power profile he has. He's body beautiful. And as he continues to add weight, there's a lot of good things that he can give you from a versatility and alignment perspective.
Body beautiful. Look at that. That was like a commercial.
Scouting turn, buddy. Yeah. Scouting turn.
I was not prepared for that reference. I haven't heard that term.
Both me and Joe were like, whoa, okay. Yeah.
Joe, I didn't call him handsome. I just said he's got a good frame.
My high school, one of my high school gym teachers used to like do like would make us do like an ab routine during like lifting and stuff like that. And
where
that
is
was what
this
he
going?
called it. No, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying, that like that was like in like the 80s or 90s or something like that. It used to be like, I don't know, it was some like a fitness term or something like that. So I just
this
wasn't
guy doesn't have a
prepared.
job anymore. Not in 2022, man. Yeah. No, I'm kidding.
Right. But nonetheless, Mateo, I totally agree on him moving inside. Like he's really built like he's going to be playing on a 5 tech or in. I don't see him coming off the edge. He's just not built for it. And I don't think it's surprising that his highlights don't really show a ton of that. Now, right now, he's actually the first recruit that we've talked about on the show entirely that doesn't at least have like a projection. His recruitment is like super wide open right now. The one that I keep seeing is there's like a lot of USC references, but honestly, Ryan, I want your thoughts on this because we've done a lot of scouting on these Clemson defensive linemen for this year's class. I think that he might actually fit really well playing for the program that his brother is currently at. Now, maybe if DJ leaves, that relationship with Dabo is a little different. Nonetheless, the defensive linemen that we see at Clemson, very similar in their usage. Power profile, big explosive guys, like a guy like Brian Brzee, who has made himself a home in the interior on Clemson's defensive line. And Miles Murphy, similar type of usage that maybe Mateo could be used. So, Ryan, do you kind of agree that maybe a Clemson would make sense the way that they deploy their defensive linemen?
Stylistically, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the name that popped to my head, and I'm glad you mentioned it, was Brian Brzee, right? Like Brian Brzee is 6'5", 300 pounds, had played a lot of edge in high school, and obviously he's continued to grow into the 3-tech, 4-4-I type that we see now. I mean, he does a little bit of everything for Clemson. They still line him up on the edge at times, but I mean, even in obvious pass situations, they'll move him all the way down to a 1-tech to be that type of interior rusher. So, I mean, he can fit, Joe. I think that I think what I need, though, for whatever team ultimately ends up with Mateo is I need a defensive coordinator that has a plan for him, right? Like they need a understanding of where he's going to fit long-term. And I think that the best defensive structures in college football right now will all be able to do that, right? Like you mentioned Clemson. I could see him in Georgia that still runs a lot of 3-4 stuff. I can see him in Alabama that goes between a lot of 3-man and 4-man. Even USC, although they are still developing on the defensive side of the football, I mean, Alex Grinch is going to work between 3- and 4-man fronts a ton as well. I mean, that's kind of where we are with the modernization of the college football game against the passing attack so much, is that there's a lot more 3 down than there was probably 10, 15 years ago at this point. So you're seeing a lot more diversity up front, which I think will go into Matayo Uiagalelei's favor at the next level.
I am willing to bet a dime that he does not go to Clemson. And I just because of the situation, like you mentioned, like it's a lot, and I mean, what do you think that family's talking about every weekend? So I don't know. It would just be a muddy water type of situation, for Mateo. I feel like to walk into that, knowing the history that his brother has there in that same situation.
Now, Matt, I totally agree with you based on looking at this on the outside that it might not make a whole lot of sense for him to end up at Clemson. I think in a vacuum, schematically, perfect one-to-one fit the way that they do deploy and use their defensive linemen. But the one really weird thing about this, as much as you would think the Uiagalelei family would maybe be upset with Dabo and the way that things are going down, and if he does get replaced, there's still like this unrelenting commitment and respect for DJ that Dabo keeps turning to him after having a bad game. He just compared him to Steph Curry. So like, I almost wonder if DJ finishes the year and maybe he enters the NFL draft on good terms, he could end up at Clemson, but it's a really odd situation that it's hard to really figure out. And I do agree that it might impact that decision and he might want to stay closer to home, which is why that USC possibility keeps being brought up with a guy like Mateo.
Yeah, I think the USC thing would be really interesting, especially too with just the fact that the new regime there, trying to get, as we've mentioned multiple times in the show, just a lot of really good football players in the door. It doesn't really necessarily matter if they have perfect, concrete homes as far as recruiting goes. For him, I think it would be a really cool situation for him to go to USC and to be in a situation where they can utilize his skill sets as an interior rusher, as a exterior person that is good against the run in certain situations, against certain matchups or teams. And then even just like a guy too, where like you see his athleticism, he could be one of those guys that in like short yardage, he is always in on the goal line or certain situations for gadget plays and things like that, where, you know, they throw him the ball, or he's, you know, the extra eligible tackle and plays on the backside where it's like sprint right and throw it back left to him. You know, so that's where for him, like, you know, he is the epitome of just getting a good football player, a well-rounded football player. The biggest question mark is just going to be for his coaching staff to find out exactly where his home is to make the most out of his play.
Joe, I have a story for you. Story time?
Okay.
Story time. Let's hear it.
Once upon a time, the USC program had this 6'5", 270-pound freshman defensive end that played a lot on the outside and then worked his way inside. Eventually grew into a 6'5", 305-pound defensive tackle that was drafted in the first round. His name was Leonard Williams.